I mean, there's a lot to say about, I mean, loads you could say about the nature of ancient liberty or the concept of freedom in the ancient mind. For a start, it's not just a universal single thing. A first thing that springs to my mind is how the Athenians thought of freedom or liberty as opposed to Spartans, for example.
Yes.
So the Spartans famously had the helots. They enslaved a whole bunch of people, and their society was extremely, extremely strict. You had very little personal liberty. Whereas the Athenians, sort of a bit on the other end of the spectrum, but you still had to be an Athenian citizen.
Yes.
The Athenians still had slaves,
Yes.
but if you were sort of a propertied full Athenian citizen, then you could expect a much, much higher level of what we would think of as political freedom.
Yes.
So right there, you can't really say just the ancient mind thought like this about political freedom. That's too low resolution. Really.
Exactly. And I think there is this idea of that was prevalent in the particularly when it comes to the Spartans. And I think there was this scene in Herodotus where Spartans go to to the Persian king. I think it was Xerxes, and they say that they will bow to no person because they are free. But their freedom didn't necessarily imply political participation in the way that most Athenians understood it.
Right, that's true.
So I think you're absolutely correct when you say that there is no such thing as one ancient conception of freedom. There have been many conceptions of freedom. So this distinction by Benjamin Constant was very much criticized, and rightfully so. One of the next major distinctions was that by Isaiah Berlin, who was a so-called Cold War liberal in the 1950s and 60s and was very influential. And he had a brilliant essay called Two Concepts of Liberty, where he drew a distinction between what he called negative liberty and positive liberty. Now, this is where I think we should be a bit more, we should get down into details. According to Berlin, these are two traditions of thinking about liberty. Negative liberty is supposed to be freedom from interference. And this is a concept or a tradition within liberalism that Berlin identifies that sees liberty as the absence of actual or potential interference with a particular sphere of activities that individuals engage into. And he was concerned that with the erosion of that sphere of activities, particularly when it came to totalitarian governments. So Isaiah Berlin was writing during the height of the Cold War, and he was very much interested in Soviet totalitarianism and this idea that the Soviet ideology that wanted to infiltrate in virtually every aspect of human life. So what he thought there was that this ideology was guilty of eroding a sphere of activities within which people were free from interference. So, and he said that classical liberals like Hobbes and Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine, they belonged to the negative tradition. And they thought that to respect a person and to respect their freedom implies that governments must respect a sphere of activities that individuals are not interfered with.
The idea, like, just let me grill, bro.
Exactly.
Just leave me alone in my own household. Me and my
Yes.
family, just leave us alone.
Yes.
If we're not hurting anyone,
Yes.
we don't need any interference from the state.
Exactly. And precisely because Berlin would say that if you live in a very totalitarian government, there is no choice you can make that is ideologically neutral. All choices are either for the central narrative that is imposed by that totalitarian state or against it. So when it comes to grilling, as you would say, it matters whether grilling is considered by those in power as consistent with the dominant narrative that they use to consolidate their power and justify their power or not. Mm-hmm. So they would say basically grilling is, it is either according to the ideology that we use to oppress you or not. Mm. If it is according to that, then we let you do it. And we may say that, yes, we are granting you freedoms. But it's a freedom that is not, but it is a freedom that implies interference if you chose otherwise. So if you were told to grill and to eat, for instance, chicken, because you could do it. And the totalitarian state would say that you are free. But if you didn't want to eat chicken and you said, no, I don't want to, and the central narrative said, you must eat chicken because doing so supports the state, or if you don't do it, you're an enemy of the people, you would be interfered with. And that is one of the major distinctions within the negative liberty tradition. This is where Berlin differs from Hobbes. Hobbes said that liberty is freedom from actual interference with your desires. But Berlin said that we should introduce a potential clause, because if we live in a very totalitarian state and there is no ideological neutral option, then you are not free to disagree with a central narrative. And he would say that this constitutes an important freedom to maintain. And he also says that one of the problems with the Hobbesian view of freedom is that it has a very unappealing consequence. If freedom constitutes non-interference from with actual desires, then we can become free by eliminating desires. That is why in totalitarian states we have many people who preach this ideology that true freedom is lack of caring or lack of worries.
Or lack of personal property, perhaps, if you really go down the communist view. Exactly.
Yes.
The thing I was thinking of, just to carry on with, very briefly, the grilling metaphor. In the Stalinist regime, they could quite easily say, no, even to own a grill is wrong, and we're going to physically take it away from you. Everyone else on the street is too poor to own a grill. Yes. You're very bourgeois, you're a kulak for daring to own a grill. Yes. Don't even care what you want to grill on it. No, you're not going to be allowed to do that.
Exactly.
It's just, and that has literally played out before in the world a few times.
Yes.
So it's not just like a metaphorical game. That sort of thing has happened before.
It has, and it also shows the arbitrariness of the communist regime, because there were many times, I think it was the new economic policy by Lenin, where kulaks were allowed some economic freedoms just to offset the adverse effect of the famine of the time. But then again, those freedoms were taken away. So this was a form of arbitrariness. It's like, we don't allow you to act this way. Now that it is politically expedient for you to act this way, we allow it to you. But at any moment, we can change our minds and basically imprison you.
Well, under true communism, not socialism, but true communism, I think the idea is that there's no private property. Everything is held collectively.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, if you look at Maoist China, they did in certain places at certain times, try to eliminate all private property. So the idea that you owned a grill was unthinkable, really. There might be a collective grill in the collective canteen.
Exactly.
But yeah, you can't just grill. No, we're not going to let you do that.
Yes.
And also, just trying to say, like Klaus Schwab, now you'll own nothing and be happy. Yeah, you will not own your own grill. Certainly not.
Yes, because everything belongs to the people.
But you're free. Aren't you free now? You don't even have a grill.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of sophistry, really, playing around with words a bit, but it's very real-world consequences.
It is, and...
potentially, anyway.
It is, and I'm really worried about this new idea that is communicated, that the personal is the political. It seems as if there is an ideology behind it that tries to say that literally everything that we do should be a matter of public vote. And this takes us to the next tradition that Berlin was talking about, the tradition of positive freedom. Now, the tradition of positive freedom is a very large tradition, and it is sort of an umbrella concept. It is not good, and it's not terribly sophisticated if we just say that there is just one concept of positive freedom. But let us see what it was that troubled Berlin about it, and what is the so-called paradox of positive liberty. Now, one of the major elements behind the positive tradition is that political freedom consists in political participation. It is the freedom to participate in the processes that govern us. And it's the freedom to, for instance, seek public office and have a voice that is heard in public. It is, in short, the freedom of a citizen. And this is a tradition that is somehow more Athenian than Spartan, if you would like. So the thing is that on the one hand, there is a noble idea behind it, as Berlin says. There is this idea of freedom as autonomy. And autonomy is the idea of self-governance. And self-governance can have collective aspects, but also it can have individual aspects. So when we talk about collective self-governance, we could be talking about the self-governance of a group. We could talk, for instance, about a people as being self-governed, when they're governed by their own, by members of who belong to their group. We could have national self-governance. We could have a form of family self-governance. This takes place in many honor cultures. There are many people who think that, we are free if we belong to a family that is free, and we have a patriarch or a matriarch who call the shots. This is another form of positive freedom. But what Berlin was especially worried about was the way that Soviet ideologues employed the notion of positive liberty. And he tracked this idea back to Rousseau and some other liberals, that he didn't say that they were Marxists in the making, but he thought that they were playing with fire in a way that they were unaware of. So the main problem with that Berlin identifies with a positive tradition of freedom is this notion of the self. And he says, if we look at the metaphysics of those ideologies, especially the metaphysics of many Marxists, we see a distinction drawn between what is called the rational self and the lower self. Now, when it comes to this, we all have this experience sometimes that we have inner conflicts, and we say, sometimes, have you ever felt this way, where you are internally conflicted and you have a dilemma, and there is a question as which part of Bo is going to be dominant?
Yeah, right. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And there is also this idea that we are conflicted and we face dilemma, and especially in contemporary societies, there is this problem of us being dragged by our appetites. So there is some half-truth in this ideology, that sometimes, yes, we are experiencing a form of inner conflict, and we are prone to think of it as if there is a conflict between two aspects of the self or between two selves. And many people in the dominant currents of the positive freedom tradition have said that there is a distinction between the rational self and the lower self, or the true self, as they say, and the empirical self. Now, this is a problem because it makes it very easy for aspiring tyrants to justify their rule as being a liberating rule. And they say it in the following form. It doesn't matter what people say they want. It doesn't matter what people say they desire. Insofar as what they desire conflicts with the main narrative that consolidates our power, they are thinking and acting in terms of what their lower self wants. But we know what their rational self wants, and we are going to impose just that.
We're going to force you to be free.
Exactly.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.